Hey guys, today I want to talk about why both high carb and high fat diets are wrong. I guess I'll start with high fat. High fat diets are becoming exceedingly popular because of people losing weight on them, and sorry about that, that's my bird. But people are losing weight on high fat diets, and that's a good thing. But they're still exploiting themselves to certain diseases, and it's unnecessary because there's no need to ever go that extreme on high fat diets. Um, like for instance, have you ever heard one of those stories about someone waking up and making some coffee and putting like a half a stick of butter in their morning coffee? It's called bulletproof coffee, and there's actually this thing called the bulletproof diet where you consume a bunch of saturated fats and drink a bunch of that bulletproof coffee. But and it's really illogical to ever go to that much of an extreme. I mean, yeah, fats are healthy in moderate amounts. I mean, you want to get them in the right ratios, but consuming that much of a single fat, like saturated fat, I mean, it's just illogical to do so. I mean, it's one thing to believe the lipid hypothesis is false. I mean, we already know saturated fat is not a bad substance, but consuming that much of something is just unnecessary. I mean, there's plenty of other healthy fats like monounsaturated fats, omega-3 fats. I mean, you want to make sure you get a good ratio of all of them. And so, and you'll hear things like, well, hey man, the Inuits up there who were Eskimos and they ate a 90% animal food diet and they didn't get no diseases. Well, yeah, but I mean, you got to look at what they were doing. They weren't eating CAFO meats. They weren't eating pasteurized meats. They were eating wild fish, wild ruminants, all of which are loaded with omega-3 fatty acids and relatively low in omega-6 fatty acids. They were eating fermented meats, which would take care of any gastrointestinal problems they would have developed. So I mean, they were doing things that people of today's world they just don't do. I mean, uh, can you optimize a diet with meat? Sure you can. You don't eat CAFO meats. You eat grass-fed meats, or better yet, if you're a hunter, you go out and get your own game. I mean, that's definitely the best of all. But and you also want to limit or just completely eliminate things like poultry and pork because those are high in omega-6 fatty acids. But just using some common sense when you're consuming dietary fats. Don't consume a bunch of them. You know, have your carbs represented at a meal, have your fats represented at a meal, and have your protein represented at a meal. You know, instead of consuming a 14-ounce steak at a meal, consume about 5 to 7 ounces of that steak. Make 2 meals out of it. High carb diets, and this is going more along the line of the 80-10-10 diet, the starch solution diet. These are vegan diets, by the way. There's no need to consume high amounts of carbohydrates and low amounts of fats either, because one thing, high amounts of carbs and low amounts of fat will promote inflammation in the body. You definitely do not want that. High carb diets. They're high in processed cereal grains and legumes, and while these are nutritionally dense foods, like for instance oats. Oats are really high in magnesium. I'm sure a bunch of vegans out there consume their daily bowl of oatmeal, and it's high in nutrients, but it's also high in a substance called phytic acid, and phytic acid binds to all these minerals and prevents them from being absorbed. Things things like selenium, magnesium, zinc, phosphorus, and really, when it comes to high carb plant-based diets, phytic acid is your number one enemy because you're consuming overwhelmingly amounts of it because you have to up your grain and legume consumption to make up for missing protein in your diet. And those are the highest phytic acid rich foods too, by the way. So you never want to eat a bunch of those because your minerals just will not absorb through the intestines and you'll become deficient. Also, another thing, carbohydrates, an excess amount of them will also raise your serum triglycerides, and serum triglycerides are a very important marker on your lipid panel test for heart disease. If you have high triglycerides, you're at an increased risk of heart disease. And it's sugar and carbs that raises this, not dietary fats. That's a misnomer that a lot of people do not understand. So when you do consume, things like legumes, that includes beans, lentils, chickpeas, things like that, and grains like quinoa, oats, millet, things like that. You want to eat them properly prepared, and how you do that is you sprout them. You either sprout them yourself or you can buy them sprouted. And what this does is it increases the nutrient content while at the same time decreasing the phytic acid content. It allows you to absorb what you're getting from the grain or the legume at a much more efficient rate. It also makes them easier to digest. And it also slightly lowers the glycemic index. That's another thing with high carb diets. People eat a lot of high glycemic foods, and that can actually put a load on the pancreas and prevent you from achieving insulin sensitivity. And insulin sensitivity is a very important marker for health. So just use a little common sense, have all food groups represented at your plate. Don't go extreme on any of them. If you're going to eat some carbs, like in the form of grains or legumes, definitely eat them sprouted. Also, when you do eat meat, don't eat a big ass 14 ounce or hell 20 ounce steak. Don't do that. Animal protein takes a little longer to digest, so when you eat a big ass steak like that, it's gonna still be in your stomach till your next meal. And just illogical. Eat about a 4 to 7 ounce piece of meat or fish. Fish and eggs are easier to digest than meat. But just watch that. And get other fats in your diet, and besides, eating a half a stick of butter in your morning coffee, eat things like almonds, pumpkin seeds, avocados, extra virgin unrefined olive oil. That's probably one of the most healthiest fats you can eat is true 100% extra virgin olive oil. A lot of olive oil is diluted nowadays with cheaper oils, so be careful there. A good way to test that is to stick your olive oil in a fridge and see if it solidifies or not. If it solidifies, that's a good sign. Coconuts are another good fat to eat. So be a little more diverse in your options. You don't always have to eat the big ass fatty cut of meat. You don't always have to dump half a stick of butter in your morning coffee. Be logical about it. Again, on the carb spectrum, be logical about that too. Eat a lot of vegetables and fruits because they're lower glycemic than your grains and legumes. And like I said, I've stated this a few times, but Eat them sprouted, your grains and legumes when you can. Um, be careful on starchy vegetables like sweet potatoes and even a few fruits like pineapple and mango. Those are some dates. Those are examples of extremely high sugar fruits and extremely high starch vegetables that should be eaten in moderation. Don't consume those as much as other vegetables. Good replacements for sweet potatoes are winter squashes, things like butternut squash, acorn squash. Those are very good. They have that slight sweetness to them without being too starchy. Um, and that's pretty much it. Eat a spectrum of healthy fats, monounsaturated, saturated, and omega-3s. When you do consume meat, eat wild game or grass-fed. Consume plenty of wild fish. That's cannot stress that enough. Fish is excellent for your health. Eat a bunch of fruits and vegetables, just a wide spectrum of those. They're low glycemic carbs that will not hurt you. Keep your grain and legume consumption to a minimum, and when you do, properly prepare them. And you can look that up on how to properly prepare grains. I mean, just go to Google and type it in, and it'll give a detailed description on how to do it. Dairy is something we didn't really discuss besides the butter in the morning coffee. Dairy is a bit of a gray zone among any diet, whether it's extreme high fat or extreme high carb. One side will tell you that dairy is bad, and the other side will tell you dairy is bad. So it's sort of stuck in limbo land, so to speak. But dairy can be healthy. You have to know what you're doing with dairy, because things like conventional dairy, it's full of hormones and antibiotics, omega-6 fats. It's just not a good sight. The milk is usually pasteurized or homogenized or both, and that can be bad as well. If you do consume dairy, I recommend you stick to things like a grass-fed fermented dairy like kefir and yogurt. Go heavy too with things like butter and maybe a little heavy cream as well. They're low in lactose and casein and relatively high in fat. Just play it smart with that. If you do like milk, if milk's your favorite dairy option, try to find something that's unhomogenized, preferably raw, but raw milk's sort of hard to find here in the States. And that's pretty much it right there. And keep the dairy to a minimum when you do consume it. And that's just about it today. So be logical. Don't eat high carb. Don't eat high fat. Just eat a proper ratio and healthful sources of all three: protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Don't go way out on the limb on one and restrict the other. It's just not overall wise to do so. And I'll see you later. Have a good day.